Okay, let's low a somber subject today. Well, a lot of them have been somber. This one is somber. Excuse me. Okay, so let's get into this. Disclaimer. There are those who watch my channel who, let's say, would be more pro than anti Koresh, right? You got pro Koresh, neutral Koresh, anti Koresh. Disclaimer. I am telling a true story, and I will try to relate the facts to the best of my ability as I remember them. My story does not advocate any kind of future actions that happen to David Koresh in terms of anything. Okay, there are those who think that, oh, you're just trying to justify it. No, I'm not trying to justify anything. I'm just trying to tell you a story. Okay, let's look at life as complex. Okay, life isn't simple narrative story that people write down in a book. Life is messy, complex, full of different kinds of stories that happen to different people randomly in some cases throughout time, and nothing's ever neat and tidy in real life, and this is certainly the case. And I'm going to try to tell the story to the best of my ability. I have my own opinions about it, which I'll share at the very end, but I'll give all the facts first. Okay. So my father was, I'll say that he was not really a very good father. He wasn't the worst father in the world. He certainly was really good at providing for the household, and I wanted for nothing growing up. And he could be generous. He got me a computer when computers were expensive. He got me a telescope. It was very expensive. Haven't told about my telescope yet. That's part of the space probe space shuttle episode that's coming in a future episode with David Koresh and his ideas and everything. Anyway, okay, so my father could be very difficult and had a very short temper, like a short fuse. He could go off really fast. Type A personality, took himself really seriously. Okay, in other words, his tastes in music took them very seriously. I was not allowed to listen to unapproved music growing up until I became like 17. Then I just started listening to whatever I felt like. You know, that's what happens when you're a teenager, right? You start rebelling. That's certainly I did. So on the levels of possible rebelling, mine was pretty low level. But yeah, you know, I like pop music. My father, of course, grew up in a different time. I mean, it's weird because my father was born in 1930, so he would have been in his early 20s when Elvis hit, and yet, yeah, I didn't really like Elvis or rock and roll. The Beatles were like, you might as well have. One summer when I was visiting my grandmother, so this would have been mid-70s, my mother said, hey, let's watch Yellow Submarine, you know, the Beatles movie, the animated film. My father's reaction was as if my mother had suggested, hey, let's watch Deep Throat with the children. You know, that like, oh, they're not watching that crap. Like, oh my God. Yeah, me and my wife joke now when we listen to the Beatles or some other rock, says, oh my God, we're going to hell. Like, oh, listen to this music. It's just rotting our souls. Man, what trash. You know, it's just so stupid. All of this old grouchy, you know, old man yells at cloud, you know, thing about music. Anyway, whatever. We all know the thing with music. My father was, you know, not understanding when it came to that kind of thing. I'll give you another example. Two more. One day, and I know this because he described it in detail. My father comes home one day, he can't sleep. Okay, whatever. Weird for my father, usually goes right to sleep. He had just had a Dr. Pepper soda. Okay, you know, regular soda can of Dr. Pepper. Concludes, Dr. Pepper must have insane amounts of caffeine in it because I couldn't sleep after I drank a Dr. Pepper. Therefore, family is forbidden to have Dr. Pepper ever to the end of time. Yeah, that's the way. Yeah, just. Uh, um, my wife, since she wasn't raised in my father's household, she had no fear of him. Like, she wasn't conditioned to be afraid of him, and they would face off. She didn't put up with his bullshit. My father could be a purveyor of bullshit from time to time. So yeah, I remember one time they were in the kitchen and I was in another room and my wife was facing me, so they're facing each other. My father's back is towards me, and she's facing me and she's looking at me and she's starting a fight, and I'm like, I'm trying to get her to stop, and she's like, not, she's like, no, it's on. But yeah, she wasn't afraid of him, and he would back down because my father was kind of a bully actually. So she'd get right in his face. She had no fear at all. So that's good for her. I had a little fear. Sorry. But sometimes I didn't. I got into a fight with him once, actually. Tell that story some other time. Anyway, yeah. It was about... Anyway, yeah, I'll tell that another time. That's a different story. Anyway. Because that's not what we're talking about today. Okay. So... All right, so the incident. Well, my father was a pilot. Okay, so he had a private plane. And I'll talk about the plane in a little bit. Okay. So the incident. So this was April 19th, 1989. As far as I can remember, that would have been Passover Eve. So Jewish holidays, Sabbaths, feast days start at sundown the day before. So my father flew in from California to Waco, and I drove down to the airport to pick him up, and Judy Schnieder. They were the only, it was my father, the pilot, and Judy Schnieder was the passenger. Okay. I'll try to get adjusted here, sorry. Excuse me. Okay. So... All right. Now, one of the things that a pilot has to do is properly load an airplane. Long story short, you may have heard in the news from time to time, there are individuals who have died, even some celebrities, because the plane crashed because it was overloaded, which is a really critical thing that a pilot needs to do. Hey, and do I have too much weight on this airplane? Okay, and I'm not going to go into all the details, but obviously it's bad. You can only carry so much. What can happen briefly is that you can take off, but then the problem is you can't get any altitude. So you just kind of hug the ground. And because pretty soon you could be coming up on some trees or buildings or whatever, and it just usually ends very badly. Okay, because the plane just can't get any higher than just basically ground level. It's like a trick. Like it's weird. It'll get off the ground, but then, and then you can't really turn because then the plane will sink. Because when you turn, you lose altitude a little bit because the plane's just barely hanging on for dear life because it's overloaded. So it's really critical to load planes properly. Okay. So my father decides that Judy Schnieder has too much cargo, essentially. And he's being, a bit probably my usual dad, non-understanding self. And he goes through her stuff and eliminates cargo, and then she's left with whatever he decides she can bring. Unfortunately, one of the things that he took away, which was something that Steve Schnieder had wanted very badly, was some underwear. Yeah, I mean, Judy Schnieder's a nice wife. Hey, honey, can you get me some underwear when you come to Waco? Sure, honey. I'll bring you some underwear, my darling. Man loves his clean underwear, right? Of course, I do. All men do. Steve's looking for some nice, fresh underwear that evening. Anyway, well, Steve, hey, honey, I'm ready for my underwear. Sorry, honey, but Don decided that your underwear essentially weighed too much to bring on his airplane. So, yeah. Well, now probably like people are thinking, well, that's ridiculous. And I mean, sure, yeah, underwear don't weigh much, right? Like a pound, I guess, maybe a few pounds at the most, maybe 2 pounds of underwear. Okay, but I'm gonna go into technically the details here so we can, um, yeah, like I don't want it to be open to question. Let's just say that my father was kind of anal about this thing. All right, it's just one of his sore spots, I guess. And plus, he didn't like Judy, which again doesn't mean anything. You know, my father didn't like lots of people, so not liking Judy didn't like my wife. So Judy was a perfectly nice person. Yeah, she was fine. Um, okay, so my father flew a Piper Comanche. I'll put a little picture up here, and then I'm going to put some figures up here as I discuss these things here. So he flew a Piper Comanche, which is a plane manufactured in the mid '60s, and the Piper Comanche, excuse me, has an empty weight of 1,773 pounds. Okay. And the Piper Comanche can have a maximum takeoff weight of 3,200 pounds. Then its fuel capacity would be 90 US gallons. That's 6 pounds a gallon. That's 540 pounds of fuel. So if we take the maximum takeoff weight and we subtract the fuel, and we subtracted empty weight plus full fuel, that's 2,313 pounds. We subtract that from the maximum weight. That leaves you with passenger and cargo capacity of 887 pounds. And then my father, let's just say he was 252. Maybe he was a little more. I'm using that number just so we get a nice round number at the end. Judy, with her hair wet, maybe maximum 135. I asked my wife just to get a maximum number for her weight. She weighed less than 135. She was tall, but she was very thin. So yeah, 135 for Judy. That leaves us with a cargo capacity of 500 pounds. Okay? So that's how much cargo Judy could have brought, between my father and Judy could have brought. So that's clothing, whatever. That's quite a bit of weight, right? This is a high performance aircraft. It can carry a lot of weight. That may not seem like very much, but for airplanes, it's quite a bit. Yeah, believe me. There are some like a small Cessna 152 cannot carry this kind of capacity, not even close. All right. So anyway, it's very likely that my father was being just irrational in his elimination of her cargo. She probably could have easily brought everything that she was bringing, and there would have been weight to spare. It's almost certain. But my father would hide behind this, like, because, he's just pretending, oh, I'm loading my aircraft and whatever. Anyway, okay, so now you know the numbers, and we have a pretty good understanding that my father's just not being reasonable. So, so there's a Steve Schnieder, Don Buns confrontation. And I saw this with my own eyes. So Judy and Steve confront my father there at New Mount Carmel on the sidewalk there in front of the houses that were up and down the street there, dirt road there. And Steve begins to talk to my father about, hey, where's my underwear? Or why didn't you bring them or something? And he had not finished his sentence when my father began to speak. Probably, I couldn't bring them, whatever, weight or whatever. But my father wasn't able to complete his sentence and Steve screamed at my father. He said, "I'm talking." And he said it, imagine someone going catatonic. I never saw anybody scream at my father like that in my entire life. Like literally, when someone screams it and you're like, like, whoa. Steve had a temper. Yeah. Steve had a temper that put my father's to shame. So my father messed with the wrong man. My father was used to being the one having the temper and throwing his temper around. Well, it's basically like, yeah, he met the boss. He had a boss fight and he lost. Okay. So anyway, now there's no physical altercation here, but it's unresolved. My father doesn't back down, and of course Steve is Vernon's right hand man, David Koresh's right hand man. So straight to Vernon. This is a man who has no fresh underwear. Okay, probably was really looking forward to that. Like I said, I would have been. So my father goes to where he's going to stay and goes off and pouts. He's people are being mean to him. Probably is the attitude. And Vernon summoned him. Hey, go tell Don. Sent somebody to my father. I want to talk to him. Of course, my father knows it's because he's in trouble about the airplane. My father's not backing down. Tell Vernon, blah, blah. I don't give a crap, whatever. I know what to do about my plane, blah, blah, blah. Whatever, something like that, Well, so David Koresh had to, excuse me. David Koresh, therefore, man, I apologize. David Koresh, therefore, went to my father and tracked him down and confronted him where he was. And of course, my father is still being obstinate, and it's my plane, and I can decide what I want to do, blah, blah, blah. Now, everybody intuitively knows that, like, I've given the technical explanation why it's fairly absurd that my father didn't bring a man's underwear, just to show the numbers, because that's the way I think about things. Of course, other people just know intuitively. I mean, a plane's not going to crash because of a pack of underwear, or whatever, a few packages of underwear, right? Yeah, I mean, which is true, typically. Yeah, when I'm talking about overloading a plane, we're not talking about underwear. Yeah, we're talking about, like, serious weight, like hundreds of pounds. Well, so, and then to quote Vernon, I'll do my best. The next day in a study, he says, well, I grabbed Don Bum, that guy, and got his big belly around, and anyway, just describing physically assaulting my father and disciplining him and beating him up. And, as a result of all of this disobedience, I suppose, from my father. And I think he made him cry, not, but I mean, cry like, I guess my father cried, essentially, because of stress. And I didn't see this, but, I wouldn't be surprised. Stress and maybe just being finally broken like a horse, I guess, like a rebellious, whatever, a rebellious child, I suppose. And then I did see my father the next morning or something, and he was rather calm. And there was like maybe a bruise or two, but nothing super serious or anything. So, yeah, that's it. That's pretty much it. That's the story. In closing, I'll say my father, by the way, that paint job that you see on that airplane, that paint job is not a usual aircraft paint job. It took my father 1 year to paint his airplane in the mid-'70s. Hardly ever saw him. Because he would leave work, go to the airport. It had a hangar, enclosed area, and he would paint and go back to work, sometimes straight from the airport. And he would take Sabbaths off. So he spent an entire year working on this paint job. It's quite intricate and very labor intensive. So just to go to show you the kind of devotion and effort he would put into it. The reason it looks like this is because it's been sitting for quite some time. This is at the end of its My father hadn't flown it for several years. My father died in 2010. This was probably taken around that time, roughly. So it's just sitting there all sad and dirty. And he offered to sell it to me one time for 20,000. But the problem was with the airplane was my father did die. The paperwork had been lost because it was lost in the fire, I think, the April 19th fire, and he lost the logs and the paperwork. And so, as far as I know, it was sold for scrap. As far from what my mother said. So anyway, sad end to a beautiful airplane. But yeah, so my father loved his airplane a bit too much, I suppose. Um, Now, I don't think that David Koresh would have done something like this in previous years. This was around the time that he was starting to get more intense, let's just say. And maybe because of we're leading up to the new light. Okay, this is April. The new light's dropping in August. I've already explained this is around the time that he's with his shenanigans with me and my wife, which I've made in a separate study, separate video. David Koresh tried to destroy my marriage. You can watch that, where I explain in detail what he's doing to try to get rid of me and my wife, so that he can have a clear path to revealing his doctrine, his new light doctrine. So, of course, I don't advocate violence, certainly not in this situation. There wasn't anybody in any physical danger. I think it would have been far more effective, quite frankly, if David Koresh had just simply told my father, Don, get in your plane and go home. And you don't get to participate in Passover because of your attitude. That's probably what I would have done. But, at this point, for whatever reason, Koresh is feeling pressure. He doesn't like being disobeyed. In the future, there are other incidences that I know about where he would command certain individuals to be paddled by somebody. I think maybe Floyd Hauptman Floyd did not like that job at all. But hey, Floyd, paddle so-and-so because they made a mistake or were disobedient or did something wrong or something. I have some documentation on that. I'm not going to reference that right now. We can talk about that some other time. But yeah, so, just, and then there's worse things than this that are in the future. And I wasn't there. I know about these things because certain individuals wrote about them, and I have documentation. And again, we can talk about those things at some time in the future when I feel like it. But true story. Make of it what you will. And I mean, my father could be a purveyor of injustice himself, to be fair. I mean, again, it doesn't justify, not saying two wrongs make a right. He punched me in the eye one time when I was a young kid, about 9, because he felt that I disobeyed him or something. I didn't deserve it. He was being unfair. He gave me a black eye. Yeah, that was extremely rare. In fact, that's the only time my father ever hit me like that at all. Most of the time I wasn't being hit. I want to be clear. I was not abused systematically. There was occasionally he would get angry, and in this case, one time he hit me and got me a black eye. There was the 20 lashes that I would receive maybe 3 times in my life. For like one time I told my babysitter to shut up. I told her to shut up because she was a bitch. But, hey, she was still an adult and I was a kid. So, anyway, yeah. And then maybe I got some bad grades. I might have got the 20 lashes for that. But most of the time I wasn't getting... The thing that I really was afraid of when it came to my father was his voice. He had a deep, booming voice. I would sit and listen to him sometimes. See, is he yelling or is he starting one of his tantrums? Because, like he had a short fuse. So, parents are what they are. I don't want to, necessarily say he was all 100% bad, or when he wasn't, but could be pretty bad sometimes. But again, does being disobedient to a prophet justify getting physically assaulted? I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think that David Koresh should have done that. I think that punishing people, certainly adults. I mean, come on. Yeah. Yeah, when you're an adult, physical punishment, yeah, I don't think so. Anyway, that's the story for today. Signing off. Oh, um, Christology episode. So we had a poll, one short, well, not a short episode, but one information packed episode where I go over everything, or a series of episodes where I. So what I'm going to do is make a one episode maybe slightly longer than usual. So instead of 60-minute limits, maybe it'll be 70 or 80 minutes, and we'll compromise that way. Okay, so we'll have a fully detailed exposition, and people can listen as much as they want, and everybody will get what they want. People can either listen to the first part, which will be basically go over all the basics, or they can listen to the whole thing and get every detail, and we'll just do it that way. And that is coming out when it comes out, because there's research that has to go into this, and I've just started a new job and I'm busy. And so that's why I put out content like this with the story about my dad, so I can get it out quick and put some information on the channel that people can listen to. And then I'll do research on the Christology episode, David Koresh and Jesus, and we'll get that out later when it'll be done, when it's done. I want to do a good job. I want to do it right. So I'm not just going to put out crap. So it's going to be correct and accurate. So anyway, until then, till next time, take care.